So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Prop 64 Cohort 2 webinar on the quarterly progress reports. We've been seeing a lot of you guys lately in our webinars, so very excited that you're here. It is optional, so we really appreciate you taking the extra time to come and learn a little bit more, be able to ask lots of questions. We want to make sure this is more of a dialogue and a conversation. So as Ashley is going through the information, we're going to be checking the chat and cutting her off so we can make sure that your questions get answered with the appropriate slides and conversations she's having. So let me go forward here. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to be going through, as I said, the quarterly progress reports. We're going to give you the opportunity to ask more clarifying questions about definitions or exactly how to count. We've kind of been through this with Cohort 1, and since everybody's projects are so different, we understand that there are going to be questions about how to count this, how to count that based on the different nuances of your projects. So again, as we've always said, I love seeing all your faces, trying to place faces to names. So if you could and can have your cameras on, that would be great. During the presentation, you can either feel free to raise your actual hand or use the feature of virtually raising your hand, and we can call on you if you want to ask the question out loud, or you can put the question in the chat. And if it's really a detailed question, you're more than welcome to email the inbox, which I'll have on the next slide here. And that way we'll be monitoring that too, that sometimes it's a little bit harder to put all the information in the chat. Let's see. I think that's about it for that. If you're a Star Trek fan, here's your little meme for you, and I couldn't help it. But whether or not it's data or data, and then also knowing what is good data, bad data. So, and I know you're all laughing hysterically because you're all on mute, and I can see that, thumbs up from people who are Trekkies. So I want to have our team introduce themselves again. You should be fairly familiar with most of us, but if you're not and you're new to your Prop 64 grant team, hi, welcome. My name's Helene Zettner. I'm the field representative and lead staff to the Prop 64 grants. Cohort 2 has 23 grantees and Cohort 1 has 10. So you all one big happy family. And then there is our program analyst, Michelle. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Killian. Of course, my cat timed it, step on my keyboard. I'm the analyst for the Prop 64 grant, Cohort 1 and 2, so probably a lot of you have at least come across me at some point. I'll give a quick plug for the invoice workbooks. They've all been, if you have a fully executed contract, the OneDrive email has gone out. So if anyone has that and did not get a OneDrive email, please let me know so we can get that to you. And if anyone has any trouble with it, just send me an email. All right, thanks.
Okay, and then I don't think Amanda is on today, but if she is, want to say hi, Amanda? She's back from maternity leave, but she's juggling 2 kids plus her job, so she may not be on today. But she is also available for our team for resources and helping out where needed. And then we have Ashley Garibaldi. She is going to be the main presenter today. So Ashley, would you like to introduce yourself before we get going?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for participating. Looking forward to any questions that you have and hopefully sharing a lot of good information for understanding expectations for the next couple of years. So.
And I've got the email address Hopefully you guys are all familiar with that. That goes, you can always send that any of your questions regarding invoicing, QPRs, local evaluation plans, budget mods, fixed asset requests, all that good stuff goes to that inbox. And we will get to it as soon as we can. There's quite a few of you guys, and plus I have 2 other grants that I oversee. So be patient with the process. I know a couple of you guys I've tried to get to within a week or so, but just be patient with us, and we really appreciate that. So take it away, Ashley.
Okay. Let's see.
I love seeing everybody's faces. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so I put in the chat box the website address that has all of the resources up until this point, and then it includes today's webinar documents, which I emailed yesterday. If for whatever reason those were blocked, like spam filters, these are the same here. The first one is the actual QPR PDF form that you'll be responsible for filling out. And then the partnered grantee guide, also PDF, that is the instructions that go hand in hand with each question, that we hope will really be a good resource for everything. So we wanted to, this meeting is essentially to give everyone an opportunity to understand what we expect in regards to data submissions. So what we're asking you in the format and ahead of time, so that you kind of get you thinking about what your systems need to be kind of adapted to pick things up. We've had prior grantees, or in the last cohort, actually use questions directly from the QPR and input it into the forms that they're using out in the field. So it may make it easier for you just to do that, and we're totally open to that as well. So also keep in mind, like Colleen said, the level of detail for this is trying to capture every type of program and nuance as best as we could. So if something doesn't quite match up with your grant or your form, please let us know. But in that, if you're responding to all the questions and you come across something, say your program isn't doing a lot of code enforcement, law enforcement, and you're not doing aerial surveillance and plant eradication, we'll have you put NA in that form so that we know when you submit it back to us that that's not a piece of data that you will be collecting and essentially worrying about. So when I get those, eventually we will construct or kind of modify the QPRs that you've sent in. And then when we turn them back over to you for Q3, they will be they could be a little shrunken down in that there's fields that you won't have to respond to if they don't apply. So our plan is to have this form out to you and in a combined Q1 and Q2. So recognizing that we're asking a lot, that's why we're going to go through all of that section by section and quick outlines of what type of information you'll be providing to us. I really recommend you look over it again and then look through the instructional guide as well, and essentially keep it with you as you're filling it out for at least the first couple quarters. A lot of the questions we get are answered in that guide as well. But of course, always feel free to reach out during this or email, in the future. So I'll pull up the guide, the form actually. Can everyone see the QPR form? We can see everybody.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Okay, so as I said, Q1 and Q2 are going to be combined. And so recognize, like I said, we're asking a lot of you, but it might not necessarily apply. So when you get a question that doesn't apply to you, please report NA. And so that's a way for me to know that you acknowledge that you read it over and you will not be counting it ever, as opposed to reporting 0, which means at this time, we did not capture it, but in the future we will. I suspect for this first submittal, there's going to be a lot of zeros just because everyone's trying to get things up and running. So that'll save time back and forth of me not having to ask you, are you going to do this, but in the future, or are you not doing this at all? So and to that point, I will be reviewing all the QPRs that get sent in. And if there's any questions on our end, I will reach out to you eventually to talk about anything that maybe didn't add up or is missing or needed a little bit more detail so that we are confident everything's going well. So the first, as you see, so there's 19 pages, but a lot of it kind of just depends on program specific measures. The information or the boxes that are highlighted in red are required. Now, Adobe will let you continue on and submit something without an answer. So this is more just a prompt for you to know that we do need an answer here regardless. So basic information like grantee, your award number and project title will not change over the course of the project. So we will keep that in a read-only format the next iteration you get. So you won't have to fill that portion out every time. Then we have basic information about who prepared it and how to get in contact if we have any questions. And then this is just the current reporting field. Big one is, do you require technical assistance? And if so, what will that look like? And that kind of keys us in beyond just questions you send for us to reach back out to you. Your grant award amount and then invoiced to date amounts here. And then associated. Sure.
This is Veronica from Sandag. When you say technical questions, can you be specific?
Anything, if it goes to how to fill the form out, what are our expectations on counting measures? It could be even stuff that's related to Helene's portion of the grant, where are things allowable, modifications that need to be made. Essentially anything that you have questions on, you can put that there, unless you want to email us separately too. So,
and for programmatic, that's connected with the quarterly progress report, it's basically at least another mechanism for you all to reach out and ask for some technical assistance in any of the grant activities. And then Ashley, I have one question in the chat box,
Sure.
which I can answer for you, but it says, is the quarterly progress report to be submitted as one document regardless of the number of subcontractors? And that answer is yes. So you and Ashley will get to this a little bit later, but you'll need to provide your subcontractors with either a replica of this form or pieces that only apply to them, and make your own kind of spreadsheet for them to provide you with the information. And then you, as the lead public agency, are going to compile all that information for one submittal of the progress report. And the due date for the quarters 1 and 2 is going to be the 15th of the month following quarter 2. So it's due November 15th. So with the invoices and the progress reports, it's all on a quarterly basis. I know that first May, June didn't really equal a full quarter, but going forward now, it will be on a quarterly basis for both invoices, progress reports, 45 days after the end of the quarter. So November 15th or May 15th, February 15th, and those should all be listed here, but also in the contract. So Veronica?
So that was my other question, because it was listed 8:15 somewhere, and then it was also listed 11:15. So so it's definitely not 8:15, even if there's zeros and NAs the first round, and then November we'll have the real data.
So for the progress report, it is going to be, we're combining quarters 1 and 2 because we want to be able to go through this webinar, be able to get these a little bit more, all the questions answered, but there's a lot in here and we want to make sure that everybody kind of understands and has some time. We also understand that in the first quarter or the first 2 months, there's probably not a whole lot of data. And so we want to be able to use that time to allow you to combine those first 2 quarters, which is due November 15th. And the August 15th was probably for the invoice because you guys could be having money. And in the contract, it probably said it also, but we already knew we were going to combine 1 and 2. Yeah.
Okay, well, we're happy you're
template.
combining. That's great. Okay.
Thanks, Veronica.
So, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Can,
so
can I
no more
ask?
questions, Ashley. So,
Oh, so it sounds like someone popped in.
oh, they
Can
did.
I, this is Margaret. Can I
Hi,
ask a
Margaret.
question? Hi. Sorry, there was a lot of music going on. Somebody's having a party, so I didn't catch all the information.
Okay.
So just to be clear, the progress report we're combining. So we don't have to do our first report until November 15th. The
Correct.
invoice reimbursement. Did I hear right that that is not until November 15th too? Because I had it August 15th on
No,
my calendar.
that one is. And so sorry, yeah, there was some
Yeah.
background noise. So Veronica, I know that you have, it sounds like Jazzercise. Oh gosh, that just dated me with Jane Fonda and instead of you know, a Zumba class. Anyway, yes. So just to repeat, the quarterly progress report, we're combining quarters 1 and 2, regardless of what the contract says, because that was a template.
Okay.
So quarters 1 and 2 will be combined and is not due until November 15th. That gives you all a chance to go through this, get your own templates for your subcontractors together on what they're reporting. You know, if you have the youth portion and say enforcement portion, obviously 2 different subcontractors, or, you know, PD versus Boys and Girls Club, are going to be giving you data. Then you will be combining it for a single submittal on a quarterly basis, which is 45 days after the end of each quarter. So November 15th is the QPR. And then August 15th is the invoice due date for May and June. So that one, because we know you will be having some expenditures, that one's fine. If it's a 0, please submit a zeroed invoice. But for the QPRs, as Ashley goes through it, if it does not apply to your grant, put NA. If it is a true 0 for the quantitative piece, put the true 0. Because we just want to know that you will be collecting it. It is part of your project. But as we go through after quarter 3, we want to try to make this a little simpler for you all and not have to go through the 17 pages that it is. So we can capture everything from everybody and try to do as much as we can in proactively for the statewide evaluation, whatever data measures they may be looking for. So did that
Thank you.
answer all the questions?
It
Okay.
did for me. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Margaret. Party on, everybody. Okay, Ash.
Thank you. And to that point too, so this is the data that we're asking for that doesn't stop you from capturing anything else that you want to collect internally that will help with your local evaluation plan and then the local evaluation report in the long run, because I'm sure you all have very detailed outcomes that you're looking for that will not necessarily be documented here. So this is for our use as well as yours, that because you can use your data, of course, for your plans and report too. So, okay. So then just asking how the funds are being expended, if on schedule, and if not, describe any corrective actions that may have been needed. And that's also for Helene to kind of keep apprised of things. And if you need help, or just letting us know that, hey, right now, actually, we're having trouble hiring someone. So we haven't been able to expend funds for those. So, but we're in the process of doing it, kind of things like that. So.
Right. And if I can interject, Ashley, it also helps us because we've kind of learned in the past that sometimes the right hand and the left hand don't talk to each other. So meaning the fiscal people and the programmatic people. So this is a way to kind of combine it. And we can see that if it says, oh yeah, we're spending on time and everything, and yet there's been no money spent and you're halfway through the grant, we know that the two hands aren't talking. So that's just kind of another little checks and balance for your project to make sure that the fiscal and the programmatic people are talking and are in alignment.
Thank you. The next section you'll have to fill out each time, and this is requesting information on project inputs and implementation. So you to indicate the status of each of your project activities below, and then provide a description of what's happening. So you're either not started planning, your implementation has started, you have completed it, or it does not apply to you in particular. So we ask about the same boxes for each one. But we want to know about your partnerships between your agencies, schools, community organizations that are supporting the project goals. Then staffing, mentors, and volunteers. Are you hiring folks for positions? What does that look like? And what's the progress? Training for staff, programmatic partners, law enforcement, community members, a lot of maybe youth mentors. Then identification, outreach, and enrollment processes. So we want to know how you're identifying youth, conducting outreach, enrolling for all the interventions you're doing. Then evidence-based programming. We want to know the strategies that are being implemented, and then how they are trauma-informed and culturally relevant. If you are doing compliance and enforcement activities, please speak to how you're implementing those currently. And then last two were data collection and evaluation. So what are your ongoing data collection measurements? And then how is that going? Have you developed those tools yet? Do they exist already? And what's your progress for those? And then finally, quality assurance. We want to know how and what methods are in place to ensure interventions are being delivered as intended with fidelity. And that's a lot of these questions too are the ones that I'm sure we've already talked about with like the local evaluation plans. So one of the big things we have included with both cohorts is talking about overall project challenges during the current reporting period. Like I said, maybe hiring or the students are obviously in summer right now, so maybe things don't ramp up until classes are back in session. Then we have an opportunity for project highlights, anything great that's happening, a lot of hard work that's happening, maybe even behind the scenes we'd like to know about too. And then the impact of COVID, most commonly, of course, is whether or not students are in person or not, or maybe meetings have to become put on Zoom to kind of get things to work. But what challenges have you identified, and what steps are you taking to implement to address those challenges?
And to be honest, I thought, oh, we'll be done with all this by the time cohort 2 comes along, and silly me. And I just want to put in a little extra emphasis on this. This is where you can, on a regular basis, let me know what's going on with your project in all these different narrative places. It gives kind of the context to also some of the quantitative things, but on a quarterly basis, this way you can keep me apprised of everything that's going on outside of emails. And sometimes when you ask for something, I'll say, oh, not a problem. Just make sure you address it in the quarterly progress reports, because this is kind of my chronology of each of your projects as we go quarter to quarter, and helps me keep track of all you guys.
Thank you. Okay. So with the goals and objectives, we have up to 5 in here and then 4 objectives. If you have more than 4 objectives, you can just keep entering on them within the text box for D, or you can add an attachment if you want. And then there's available a generic narrative section at the very bottom of page 19, and if you'd like to add more information as well. So these goals and objectives should remain the same as what was put in your application, unless there's a significant change that has been made and arranged with Helene. So since these should remain static, future versions will just have your answers cut and paste in there, so you don't have to keep refilling them out every time. So those will stay here. The goals and objectives will not change, of course, but then we ask you to talk about each quarter the progress towards those stated goals and objectives during the current reporting period, any challenges of that specific goal and objectives, and then what were, if any, what steps were implemented to address those challenges. So we talked about above any challenges that you have as a project overall, but then these are honed down to specific goals and then their associated objectives. So we can kind of get an idea of even more detail of how things are being worked on in an itemized sense. So.
And as Ashley said, these goals shouldn't be changing throughout your project. So we're going to be looking at the work plan that has your goals and your objectives that were in the applications, because that's what you were rated on. And we totally understand that, you know, someone who wrote the grant a year ago and now you're putting things into place. Some semantics might need to change a little bit or be adjusted, and we can be flexible with that as long as you know, the main intent and the goals aren't going to be significant. Sometimes a goal is listed more as an objective, so we want to kind of, you know, flesh that out too. But we want to make sure that you talk with Ashley and I first before we update any of those goals and objectives that were in your work plan.
Yes, and so when I'm reviewing the QPR, I will be making sure that it matches your application, just like when I'm reviewing your local evaluation plan that you'll be submitting. I will be making sure that those match your application, barring what Helene just said, that you've reached out to us. Just so we ensure that things are being reviewed and that all of a sudden some other complete, you know, kind of reversal hasn't happened. More is always welcome to be added if it works for your program and is allowable, but just we will be reviewing all of those. So keep that in mind when you're submitting information. So just, you know, if you have those, if not, you can leave, you can put NA if you have more than those, probably 2 or 3 goals. It seems common to have. Onward to section 1.4, we're asking you to talk about the description of your actual project and then where you classify yourself as far as project purpose area. Focusing first on youth cannabis use prevention and intervention. You'll see this first, essentially half of the QPR focuses on that once we get through the programmatic kind of basic information. And then the compliance and enforcement is the bottom half of the QPR. So we want to know, do you formally assess youth entering your project, yes or no? And then if you do, what is the description of that assessment? Some folks already have that identified. And if you aren't and you're working on that, please let us know here. So perhaps you're working with the Office of Ed and they have their own, we have, you know, try to contact with them and get that information so you can have it here. So we know that you have it already in place or are in progress working on that. These are all the youth development activities and case management activities that we've found tend to be common. So if your program doesn't use them, then don't select them. If there anything else that doesn't qualify under one of these, you can describe it here as well. And these are all ones that I think we also included in the statewide logic model too. So talking about a bunch of different types of referrals and then individual versus group counseling, mentoring, academic stuff as well too. And then important, very important is how do you define the success for youth in terms of these project activities? So we want to know the measurable milestones your project uses to determine when a youth has successfully completed services. So are they getting substance use services? Are they getting mentoring? We want you to develop a definition and use that for identifying those youth who are successfully exiting your project when you complete section 4 below. So this definition could be any amount of time in pro-social activities, a dosage of services received, improvement in an outcome measure, or maybe a decrease in usage of a substance, or other definitions specific to your project. Something occurring, we want to know why, or is there an increase or a decrease, a bigger, more detail than just something, well, they showed up. Is showing up to a class the only level of success that you're defining for a project? Can you not, hopefully you can be able to measure and discover more about those folks than just whether or not they sat down, kind of thing. So we'll be looking into that and also kind of comparing it to what your goals and objectives are, and hopefully those will match up too. Then we have the cannabis compliance and enforcement activities. any of these that apply to you. And we also include definitions in the guides that kind of have a little bit more specificity than we wanted to put here. Are you eradicating plants? Are you doing remediations? Anything else you want to add here? Just general investigations. And then, of course, you have to also define what success means for those activities that are completed. You want to have a certain amount of code enforcements that you're more than you used to. You're increasing investigations, or you're eradicating more plants. You're decreasing the number of complaints that are occurring locally, things like that. What kind of metrics are you using to define success in your program? So keep that in mind while you're developing the LAP, and then also when you're looking towards filling out the information for the quarterly progress report. Public.
So you
yeah.
want to stop just for a second. Does
Sure.
anybody have any questions? I know nobody's done anything in the chat, but if anybody wants to open up their mics and ask any questions so far. All right, Ashley.
Thank you. Section 2, we're going to ask for public health awareness and education in schools and community. This is another section that we saw from Cohort 1 that there was a lot of activities surrounding this. So during, you'll see a lot of italics during the current reporting period. That's just a reminder, just that's happening right in the period in which you're reporting. So you don't have to keep an ongoing tally from prior quarters too. So just to point that out. We want you to focus in this section on project activities that increase public health awareness and education among school children, young adults, school district staff, teachers, parents, and members of the community if applicable. Again, put NA if you are not going to be capturing these ever in your project. If you perhaps will in the future, just put 0. So we want to know the total number of school educational events you put on, and then the number of students who attended, teachers who attended, and then any other staff that may have also attended. And then a lot of what is common in your programs is the number of community educational events. We want to know how many youth and adults were reached. Oftentimes there's community surveys that may be delivered to get maybe some qualitative data and support through that. And you're handing out brochures at a local events. That's where you'll be putting those on, or you're doing a community-wide presentation to groups of people as well. And then if you are doing a social media campaign activities, we want to know how many youth and adults are potentially being reached, social media materials that have been passed out, and that could be commercials, websites, pamphlets, however you define it. And then hits captured, that's the best way we could kind of itemize that. It's sounding like from Cohort 1 that there's different ways of measuring those things. So however you'd like to report, just put it in that box, and you can also describe it in the narrative later on what you're expecting to kind of report. It may just be, I don't know all the metrics that you could be capturing, but it sounds like there's a lot of different details that you can find out from, say, like Instagram visiting pages and time spent on websites, things like that. But we'll leave that to you to kind of figure out what is feasible for your project and what fits best too. Then with this, we're again asking for the definition of success for your awareness campaign, essentially. What are the milestones for success to determine if the awareness and school education in schools and communities has been successfully completed? Embarking on campaigns, are you doing events? Was there a certain amount of attendance you're hoping for, an amount of knowledge gained, or behaviors decreased? Anything, perhaps you're doing community surveys or pre-post baseline kind of comparisons on folks who have maybe entered a presentation as opposed to when they're leaving. Anything like that is great to know. And again, we will also be looking at compared to your goals and objectives. Section 3 is kind of a catch all in a way that we heard from cohort 1 they'd like, and we're assuming you will as well, to kind of identify all the hard work you're doing behind the scenes that include project outreach. So these are just the overall total number of outreach activities your project is accomplishing during the current reporting period, and then hours spent on those activities. This will give us an idea of what you are doing to promote the project, and perhaps identifying referrals through programmatic partners, or even just meeting with potential partners to kind of get things up and running. So while it may not be actual, it may not be interacting with the actual participants yet, you're also doing kind of behind the scenes work to establish the program that will be providing services in the long run. So you're kind of marketing, maybe you're marketing yourself to local retailers, and you're saying, this is what we're going to be doing with us. Would you like to work with us? And then here's our materials. And that's, educating retailers and then consumers about underage sales, for instance. So of course, then the ability for you to put a narrative here is super helpful too, because then if it doesn't necessarily fit here, then you can describe why, and then give us details that would help fit or help us understand. So. Does anyone have any questions up till this point?
There's just one in the chat, and I'm gonna have to double check my memory, but it's about using the grant name or the BSCC name of Prop 64 with agreement numbers on materials that are going out to the community and things like that. And we're not as strict as the feds, but we do want to know prior to any printing that either our logo or our name is going to be on that, so that we can see what the mock-up looks like. But other than that, it's we don't require that information that it comes from Prop 64 monies on that material. But it could be another good I can't even think of the word of it, but to put out there that you have that grant when you have the material. So hopefully that answers the question, but I'll look it up.
Great, thank you. Was that all the questions in the chat?
And Colleen's on mute, but yeah,
Oh, okay.
it looks like that's it.
And why not? Why not?
Sorry, I can't see the picture. I'm
Yeah.
presenting. So.
No,
Okay,
I said that's it, and please feel free, chat up the box or open your mic. This is your time.
All right, moving on, we'll talk about section 4, which is youth enrollment quarterly totals. So we want to know the youth entering and participating in your project during the current reporting period. This is the big one that starts to itemize who is coming in. It's not necessarily individual level data. We're not asking for that. If you are capturing that, then we want it kind of rolled up into just totals. So we want you to record the number of youth entering the project during the current reporting period. Each line should represent an unduplicated count of individuals. So line 1 should include all individual youth referred to this project, and this should only count individuals one time, even if they were referred multiple times this quarter or during a previous quarter. So we want to know youth referred to this project, youth enrolled in for the first time or second time or third time, recognizing sometimes youth maybe they can get kicked out, or they kind of disappear. They want, if they come back and say, I really want these services again, then you put them in second or third time enrollment. Then there's just some rules about counting, about how the total numbers of these enrollees should not exceed, or any of the information should all kind of essentially match up. If you're enrolling 10 kids and then you have demographics for 15, we're going to ask why. So we want to make sure that those match up down the line. And again, those are instructions that are more specific in the guide and then here along the way. And you'll see while you're reading it.
Can I
What
ask
we
a
do,
clarification? for that?
sure.
So B, C, and D should equal A?
Yes,
Okay, thanks.
yes, thank you. Oh, so actually, sorry. So referred, so the more, you could have 100 referrals, actual enrollments should, they probably won't match. I mean, unless everyone who's referred is enrolled. What
Got it.
should match, sorry, is if these three together, you had 100 actually enrolled over the quarter, they should match the number that are, say, reported here on their participation status, their type of referral and diversion, and then we'll talk about demographics. So if you enrolled 100, there should be 100 somewhere as a sum for this age group, gender, race.
Thank you.
For first time enrollments versus duplicates, because you don't want them duplicated, right?
Correct.
Do we determine the length of time that if they miss and they want to re-enroll, or is that, do you have a specific time of what to be?
Great question. We leave that to you to define. If you want to put that in the additional narrative on page 19, that's always helpful too. We recognize everyone has different programs. We want to be flexible with you. If it means they've stopped participating for 6 months and they came back, or it could be 3 weeks. It's up to you to identify those parameters. Because recognizing a lot of times programs don't ever actually kick anyone out. It's kind of like a soft, exit, if you will. Because I'm sure you all aren't going to turn someone away if they decide to come back. So the best way we thought to capture it would be, second and third or more. So once you have determined these enrollments, and I should specify, enrollments are for those youth, up to certain, obviously there's certain age changes or parameters identified for each one of your target populations. So I say youth kind of in general. Of course, they could be 20 and a half years old. These enrollments are really focusing on kind of case management types of folks that are enrolled. We're talking kind of people who are going to be tracked over time. If you're just doing a classroom presentation every month to different middle school classrooms, you're not going to be necessarily tracking behavior change over time. You may be doing a pre-post survey with them to determine maybe knowledge-based changes, but you're not going to be tracking them as far as official formal referral and enrollment. So if you're doing more of a community awareness, non-tracking, kind of whoever's there will be presented with information, this isn't necessarily the section that you're going to have to respond to. Again, we will be looking to make sure that what we expect you to fill out is filled out, or vice versa. So if you have questions about that, always reach out to us. This is, again, is just something that we're trying to capture so we know actual physical enrollments as opposed to, or with, over time, as opposed to kind of informal outreach and awareness activities. And that's why we ask other questions, kind of saying like, oh, how many adults and students and staff did you reach? You could respond to those if you aren't tracking over time in enrollment areas. For those that you are tracking, we want to know kind of where they're coming from. So in your essential cohort that you're identifying in this quarter, are they coming from probation, court? They don't have to. These are just all the options that we could think of. Outreach is generally someone who that could fall into, they found out about the program through word of mouth, through your efforts, and they said, I want to attend. So they don't have to be, it's like a self-referral essentially, as opposed to maybe a teacher identified that youth needed additional assistance, or maybe they were actually a formal probation diversion referral. If they're self-referral, then of course they would just be no contact with law enforcement as opposed to informal. Perhaps they talked with the CSO and that CSO referred them to the Office of Education, and the Office of Education wants to provide mentorship training to them. Total example. And then whether or not this is mandatory or voluntary or unknown. Then for those who are enrolled, we ask about age groups then broken down by these ranges. Then gender identities that can be reported. And then all of these race and ethnicity categories are the ones that are also reported on that government code section we covered last month for the LAP. So that form that was optional for you to use, or you can use your own as long as you're capturing all the data, is the same here. So however many participants you have, we're going to expect to see that many in some form of enrollment here, itemized here. And then the total should match as well. Then we have educational status. Are they even enrolled in school? Then employment status, different types of employment. Are they employed and they're not looking? Are they looking for more? They might be middle schoolers, so they're not even looking for employment. That's fine. And then risk status of what they kind of came in as, especially if you're doing one as a part of the first section that you reported on. So those enrollments, again, we're looking for you now to report on those youth participating in development activities and case management. So in this reporting period, we want the youth to report, in this case, they can, of course, be on receiving multiple interventions or participating in multiple activities. So there can be duplicative counts here. One youth could get referrals for all of these instances, and then also be getting tutoring and then mentorship and also life skills training. So these totals don't have to match your enrollments, because we expect that most of them will probably be receiving multiple types of services. So if in the event, and we'll talk about this later, you have youth who have successfully completed, by your definition, the program, but you don't actually stop giving them services because maybe they want to keep taking classes once in a while or participating in activities, we consider those successfully completed still active. If you are doing that and you're still providing services to folks, then you can still report them here. If you have successfully completed participants and they're done and they no longer receive services and they go off on their way, you're just reporting them when they got it, and then they'll be done. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit, because we realized over time, a lot of programs do offer the option of, well, when they're done, we're not kicking them out. They're still welcome to receive more types of referrals or treatment or support. So all of these activities here are the ones that are linked or check boxes above on page 2 or 3. So if you check those up there and then maybe say you're not doing it down here, then we're going to ask, we're going to verify. So. Section 5 covers essentially the same information, but we're asking about the youth who have exited during this given quarter. Those, of course, are first, second, and third who have entered and then exited. So based on the number of times they entered in your project or for your project. We want to know, and then here's the section where we talk about still active versus inactive. So these are the reasons why we figured or we estimated, other than where you can kind of tell us what reason there are, we want to know how they exited, under what category, and how many of them. And this again should not be duplicated. This should be a single reason why they left. So the total lines for this one should match the values on lines 1, 2, and 3 in box section 5.1 below. So again, still active. They completed the, their 16-week course. They did everything that you defined as successfully completed, maybe, and then they wanted to stick around and still do activities with you. Totally fine if that's what you prefer. Then you report them here that they are active, but they have successfully completed. If they are done, then they are done and they are inactive, but they also successfully completed. Dropped out, lost contact. They were asked to leave. Unfortunately, maybe they were arrested, or oftentimes, or sometimes there are services that are found not to be appropriate for youth. And then and hopefully we see no answers and did not collect, because everyone's going to be great and knows exactly why everyone completed something. So now the partnering information I already covered. We want to know their age group, their gender identity, their race and ethnicity, educational status, employment, and risk status. And that will allow us to be able to hopefully say at the end of this that we had, so many, hopefully thousands of enrollees that successfully exited. So many of them are this age and this risk level status and things of that nature, kind of higher level things that we can roll up as a summary to all of these projects together. Of course, again, it doesn't prevent you from collecting more individual level data that you can keep internally of safe and following proper protocols, of course, that you can speak to later on in your local evaluation, your final local evaluation report, that may have even more detailed information, of course, appropriate to the level of the data that you're collecting. But
Right. And you can also send attachments if you want to.
yes.
We're not opposed to that at all, because the more information we have surrounding your program and the things that you're collecting outside of this can give us even a clearer picture as we go through the next couple of years. So if you want, you're more than welcome to attach additional information.
Yes, great point, because we had one grantee from Cohort 1. They're actually doing surveys for all their cannabis retailers. And because their plan is to do training for them, but they wanted to know from the retailers what kind of training they actually wanted. So they did surveys ahead of time to gauge their level of interest and the topics that they wanted that grantee to cover. And they actually provided us an attachment that had all of their qualitative questions that had answered and some of the answers that they received from those retailers, and then letting us know this is the information we already obtained, and we're going to turn around and use it in this way to capture the certain outcomes that we already reported on for retailer education levels and decreasing underage cannabis sales, things like that. So
Right. And just know that if you're working on something there throughout the next, couple of years, there may be questions from others within this cohort too that, will go, oh, yes, we can, connect you to, Woodlake because they're doing this. So in those instances, we're not going to have all the answers, and we want to make sure that we can help you network with those other programs that are doing something similar. So if we receive additional information, like Ashley just said, and someone else is going to be doing that, we now have the information that we can, help you along and maybe not have to start from scratch.
yeah, we have at least 2 grantees that are working on Friday Night Live, and then several with the Social Changery and the Stanford Toolkit. So, hopefully those avenues would also share with you that, we're also working with, say, Monterey or whoever. But if you're curious, and please use the chat, maybe others in this group will be able to kind of link up together and say, maybe we already use a form's already identified and they're willing to share for data collection purposes. So, so with those successful exits that you defined, and you told us how you're defining those successful exits, We want to know the total number of youth who's demonstrated positive outcomes by listing them below in these items here. So individual youth should only be reported once per cell, except for youth who enrolled in the project more than 3 times during the entire grant period. So this, so they're split out here and there's more below. I'll cover those in a second. So this allows for tracking the total number of youth with positive outcomes. Youth may be reported in multiple outcome types. So improved academic performance and attendance, and then in multiple enrollment categories. So they could be enrolled several times across the way. So these are just the types of outcomes that we could come up with that we foresaw perhaps happening with your projects. And there's also an opportunity down below to add others that are specific to yours. So we want to know the number who had their reduced assessed risk status, reduced quantity or frequency of substance use, increased perception of harm of cannabis, increased protective factors, resiliency skills, increased pro-social behaviors, number of parents and caregivers with increased knowledge of negative impacts of youth cannabis use, improved family or caretaker support relationships, improved attendance, academic performance, decreased antisocial behavior, improved mental health status, without contacting the justice system, improved school behavior, perhaps fewer disciplinary incidents, diverted from drug-related disciplinary incidents, improved employment status, no longer working at cultivation sites. We've had grantees where they're hoping to decrease teens who are finding work essentially for retailers or illegal growers. So, and then maybe if you're measuring how many youth are no longer on probation because they've met the steps they wanted for their officers to kind of take them off probation, then that's always great to hear. Do we have any questions about those outcomes or any other things beyond that?
Bueller. Bueller. Okay, there's nothing in the chat. Anyone? No, some of you guys look awake. Okay. Oh, are all the items required? No.
No. Okay, so if your program does not measure these specific things and you're not supposed to measure them, put an NA. So if you're not worrying or focusing on academic success or change in behavior regarding school attendance, put an NA there. If you're not, tracking probation status changes, put NA there. Now, if you said in your proposal and your local evaluation plan, you're going to be doing those things, and then we get the QPR answers and you say, well, we're not tracking that, then that's when Helene and I are going to reach out and say, how can we work with you to figure that out? So,
right. So just know that NA to us means not applicable, and that a 0 is a true 0, that you will be tracking that, or you will have activities that you'll have data for that later on down the road. But it's not a true, we're not doing that at all.
yes, thank you. And we will expect probably in this section for Q1 and Q2 being combined, there's probably going to be a lot of zeros and a lot of because time is needed to kind of ramp things up, especially if the school year is kind of getting rolling and then COVID stuff. So it's not a negative thing, but we just want to know so that we know for planning purposes for Q3 how to tailor your plan too. So.
Right. And again, we're trying to do that so that it cuts down on the amount of measures that you're having to answer. But it also doesn't mean that if in the next couple of years you have an augmentation or you have some savings and money and you want to try to pilot a small thing and you get approval for that, that we can open those particular measures up in order to count those. So, if you put NA and it was like, oops, really shouldn't have, we can go back and open those up.
Yes. So when you'll get this, you'll see all of these boxes are blue for the first quarter one and quarter two. Quarter three, if you're not responding to this, it'll just be a white blank box, which is read only, so that you can't put anything in there. But it'll still exist there if in the event something changes. So section 6 is focusing on cannabis compliance and enforcement activity quarterly totals. So during the quarterly total or quarterly reporting period, each line below represents an unduplicated count of an activity. Again, if your project does not utilize a given compliance and enforcement activity, then report NA. What are the total number of cannabis operations related educational, informational, or outreach events initiated during that time? Maybe you're going to retailers and doing some kind of outreach for them to understand what Prop 64, your grant program, looks like and what their expectations are for you. And you're doing training on selling to minors, or hopefully educating consumers about the risks of cannabis, perhaps if they're pregnant or lactating. So this is more the activities initiated, or what are you working on now? How many of those have happened? Then we want to know a total number of compliance or code enforcement activities initiated. That's by your definition, because they range so significantly across grantees. We'll let you decide. We want to know how many inspections were initiated or completed, the number of code enforcement actions or violations found if you're doing those, the number of permits maybe were applied for in that quarter. Then we want to know the total number of enforcement activities initiated as a whole. These do not total up to this one. This is, again, is by your definition, because you could, in theory, have eradicated 100,000 plants. That doesn't mean you've done 100,000 activities. So how many aerial or satellite surveillance inspections were initiated? How many illegal cultivation areas were identified? How many unlicensed cannabis growth investigations were initiated? Maybe the number of unpermitted plants you identified, environmental inspections initiated, environmental tests done, crimes found, reclamation plans developed, and then the number of other law enforcement investigations initiated, maybe trafficking, illegal products, parcel interdictions. I believe some grantees are doing. Complaints responded to, some indicated that they were going to be measuring that as well. Then with all of the activities you've initiated with compliance and code enforcement, or in compliance and enforcement, we want to know the outcomes of those. So these are all the outcomes that are kind of associated with ones above. Enter the total number of activities that demonstrated positive outcomes listed below as applicable to your project goals. So this allows us and you to track the total number of positive outcomes that are to be reported, and then hopefully you report on through your report at the end of the cycle. So we want to know, of those that you started, how many were actually completed for operations of educational, informational outreach events for cannabis, maybe the number of retailers you have trained with increased knowledge of cannabis code and regulation, increased awareness of youth cannabis use and illicit cannabis. A lot of grantees are trying to educate retailers on certain mechanisms of what there's allowed and what's not, and then violations are found. We want to know the number of code enforcement and compliance activities actually completed, resolved violations, number of permits were issued, penalties collected, cannabis taxes collected. Again, you may not be able to answer these things. We hope you can, but sometimes they actually might not be known for several months down the road. So please let us know. And we also recognize too that there are seasons for things. So some quarters might be slower than others. If it's a grow season, you might be finding 100,000 plants to eradicate, but in whatever the winter time, you're maybe not necessarily finding a lot of satellite imagery that will help with investigations. So. Section C is the enforcement activities completed. So how many plants did you eradicate? How many environmental inspections were completed? How many reclamation plans were completed? The number of eliminated sedimental impacts, the number of unlicensed cannabis growth investigations that were completed, illegal products that were seized, the number of products were tested. We have grantees who are looking at the level of essentially harmful materials within products that have been found, and they want to demonstrate to the public that if you buy illicit cannabis, you don't know essentially the THC levels, and perhaps there's lead and other foul chemicals attached to it, and they're using that to help educate the community based on the results of what they've kind of found locally. So then complaints resolved of those that were filed, and then the number of other law enforcement investigations completed that may kind of as a catch-all for other things that aren't necessarily specified above. And same with other, this is a text, these are actually all text boxes. So if you want to put a little bit of detail in there that maybe kind of itemizes things, we had one grantee that said they found this number of plants, but then they also found all these other types of drugs and the amounts that they found too, and they included that in the other section too. So that's interesting for us to find out, and something that maybe we can itemize at the end too, but I don't necessarily know how many pounds of cocaine is going to be found across the way for some folks. So, but there are grantees that are finding it. So as mentioned before, section 7 is this additional narrative, and this is a catch-all too, just for anything maybe you ran out of space in section 1 that you want to talk about more, anything that you want to itemize that doesn't fit anywhere else, or that you really want to highlight that if you don't want to include as an attachment or perhaps in your email when you're sending the QPR back to us. This is just space for that as well. And hopefully there should be enough space for that and all the narrative along the way. We change some of the settings to allow you to input that. But if there are problems when you're filling this out, maybe something's accidentally linked to another cell, please let us know right away, and then we'll fix that for everybody. So, does anyone have any questions on this form?
There is nothing in the chat, and I do not see any hands raised. And I just want to reiterate that we know this is a lot.
Yes.
And we understand that it will take several months to try to figure this out, get your subcontractors the pieces that they need, and we totally understand. We just want to make sure that we're setting the stage now, so that there isn't something surprising later on with the data that's either been submitted or hasn't been submitted, and we're kind of working out all the kinks right now. So it'll be much easier doing all this work up front, be much easier as we go through these next several years collecting the data. And we understand this looks like a lot, especially for those of you who are just doing the PPA 1, and that's fine. That just means your section is a little bit smaller to report on. And I
have a
still
question.
don't have anything in the chat. Oh, there you go, Mariana.
Yes. To be able to get added on to, like, for the emails to receive them, do I request it to, like, who we received our grant with, like in partnership, like we're like the subcontractor, I guess you could say, or do we request it directly to you to get added on for like emails and stuff, like for, like, I know that the OneDrive that was sent out, stuff like that. I know they mentioned it in the last meeting that there was a form to request to be added on.
Absolutely. So it's a grantee contact sheet, and we usually will not necessarily have everybody on our list that just randomly asks. We have it go through the project director just because, we're not sure who some of the subcontractors are, and maybe they want to provide the information filtered through them. So you can let us know, and the form is out on the website with all those resources. And then we can also, what grant are you with?
Here in Fort Wayne, the
Fort
Department of.
Wayne.
Mhm.
Okay. If you send us an email to the Prop 64 inbox, we can email that form directly and you can work with the
On
team
the
there.
portion with the Boys and Girls Club, we're doing like
Okay.
a with the youth.
Got it.
So I just wanted to, get that going.
Yeah, that form has a place for additional individuals. It's mostly just for those four main people, the project director, the day-to-day, the financial officer, and the fiscal day-to-day. But if they're like, yeah, sure, we can have these three people from Boys and Girls Club there on all the distribution lists, that's fine. The more the merrier.
Get more clarification from them to see if they just want to like have
Yep.
the overview of it and then filter it down to us, or if they'd rather, add us on. So I'll talk to them.
Right. Yeah, it's different with every grant. Some of them, they're just like, nope, there's no secrets. We're transparent with all our communication. And other ones are, certain, activities only need to have certain information and filtered through us. So, yep, just talk with them and we can get you set up if that's the way it goes.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I don't think I see any more. Anybody else want to open up their mic and ask any questions about the form before Ashley goes, talks about the corresponding guide for the actual report? Go ahead, Ash. I don't see anything.
Thank you. Okay, so this is the instructions for the quarterly progress report. Everything that we covered will be in here, and this is just a quick introduction on how to save it and submit it to us. Again, the dates are here. So quarter one and quarter two are combined, so you'll be turning it in on November 15th. Then these cover everything that we asked of you, especially how we define certain things. So there was only so much space in the QPR. If you're interested in what we define, like say data collection and evaluation, then your definitions will be here. And then any definitions of what we consider substance use awareness education. So all the activities we listed, if you're not sure if yours falls into one of those check boxes, then consult the guide to see how we view it. Of course, how we define counseling, and we try to be as broad as possible. Same with mentoring and support services. And then we have workshops, and then many different types of referrals and linkages that you're going to provide to the youth. Then same with the associated activities for compliance and enforcement. What we expect on how you provide definitions of success, and then how to count all of the things that we're asking you to report on. So again, whether or not it can be duplicated or not duplicated, what a total number of educational events means to us, and how for you to look and turn around and report it to us during the current reporting period. So again, every question we ask, there is a partner description within and the expectations of how to count it. If it's not answered here or you're still not sure, please reach out to me. You can send it directly to me or to the Prop 64 Cohort 2 email that Helene listed on the first slide of the PowerPoint. So.
I was just about to say that. And we have this all here for you for the definitions, so that when we roll things up from the quarterly progress reports, we're hopefully comparing apples to apples and not kiwi to apples. And so that's, and as Ashley said, if you have any questions because you defined it a little bit different, just let us know, because, we don't want to be misrepresenting any of the data that you're providing when we have to do our overall legislative reports, or when we end up speaking with a statewide evaluator.
Yeah, exactly. And, we're it is a lot, but we're trying to make it easier so that everyone's on the same page. And if you're not sure, just consult this, and then as well consult us. So we just had a grantee asking about, well, if they, they self-refer, because Friday Night Live is kind of a interest-based participation. I mean, someone can tell them about it, of course, but it's whether or not they would like to kind of, it's not mandated. So where would they fall? It would be a family or self or family referral or outreach. They heard about it through like a school presentation and they came to the appropriate partner, then that's where you would report them, as opposed to maybe a formal court referral. And then definitions for what we consider youth diversion, participation status, and then demographics. This again is recommendation. This is associated with the recommendations for collection and reporting of juvenile race and ethnicity data, and that form that we mentioned in the LEP webinar that is also on the webpage resource that I showed earlier. That covers all of the race and ethnicity data itemized for what you're expected to report on based on government requirements. Education, employment, and then exits and definitions of entries, exit definitions. Still active versus inactive is a new addition that we included. Exits, the same definitions of what age group means is already listed above. And then these are expectations of what youth outcomes kind of look like for all the ones that we could think of that have been included in section 4 and 5. And then section 6 talks about quarterly totals for enforcement and compliance, all the activities that you initiated, what those look like, and then what outcomes look like for the ones that were successfully completed. Retailer trainings.
Question here.
Yeah.
Hi, Jeremy, San Francisco Office of Cannabis. Thank you, Helene, Ashley, Michelle. Video's off because my computer is slow. For counting enforcement related activities, if a jurisdiction is hiring additional staff to support this effort, are the numbers tallied from the individual who completed one of these, or as the department as a whole, even if staff is not funded by the grant?
So great question. So I think if I understand, so if you hired 3 new people to report on it, code enforcement, have those rolled up into one submittal. So you're only going to send us one quarterly progress report. So you probably have to have a point person to take all the data from the numerous employees that you hired or exist to support the efforts, and then roll that up and turn it into us in one document. As far as what's being funded by the grant and not being funded by the grant, Helene, is that a correct answer? I'm not.
Well, Jeremy, no one's asked that. Yeah. So if it's part of, I mean, there's work being done that's in all of this that isn't necessarily directly funded by Prop 64, but if it's part of the overall grant activities and goals that you're trying to, accomplish, then I would add those numbers in, and you could make a note as a disclaimer in one of the narrative pieces that states that the number for 1.A3 combines all the illicit grow numbers regardless of grant funding.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, we don't want you to go leaf by leaf. It's a little hard, but yeah. Let's see, Ashley, we have oh, and it says that the guideline is labeled as a draft, so will any of this information be changed? Not necessarily, but since we may have some tweaking on the actual QPR forms for you, we wanted to leave it in draft mode in case we needed to update anything, since this is the corresponding guide document to the QPR. So if anybody finds anything where, the semantics are a little bit wrong or we need to better define something, that we have that flexibility, but nothing significant and broad sweeping on this. It'll be just tiny stuff. Correct, Ashley?
Right. It was especially important for cohort 1 because we were kind of starting off essentially new to all of these, the majority of these topics. So it was especially important to hear back if we were missing, not that you're all invited to let us know about anything that you think may be valuable to add. If it's not something that's necessarily common across grantees, then we'll have you report it for your individual level outcomes on like the other or the narrative sections. But yeah, we tried to, it was everything in the kitchen sink, but also we don't want to overwhelm you. So it's kind of a weird balance of trying our best to just put it all out there. And if it doesn't apply, then just put NA. If it doesn't ever apply, as opposed to it will apply, but not right now, which is a 0. So.
Okay, anybody else? There's nothing currently in the chat.
So yeah, those are, and then just, yeah, instructions, everything paired with the QPR, as detailed as we hope to include without being restrictive, recognizing that everyone's very different in their expectations and outcomes and how they run, especially programmatically with partners and such. So again, quarter 1 and quarter 2 will be together, due November 15th. Start talking with all your partners, anyone who's going to be submitting data, get them on the same page for expectations, and maybe creating databases to capture all of this and forms to capture all of this, so that by the time November rolls around and you're turning them in, it's going to be just a matter of entering in the totals that you have this far. So.
Yeah, we understand that there's going to be some growing pains with this too, as we go through this first, year of trying to figure out what type of data is in the QPR, what is part of your project additional data. So just putting it out there that your growing pains are our growing pains too, and we'll work together to make sure that by the time we hit year 2, this is smooth sailing.
Okay, and so that's all I have. Again, just the website here has the QPR, then the guide, and then any of the additional information that we've already shared with you for evaluation resources, the LEP stuff, the sample LEPs, and then if you go all the way down to section 6, all of Helene's stuff is ahead of this, especially fiscal and programmatic requirements. And then section 6, let's see, item D has the race and ethnicity form that I referred to. For your programmatic partners may want to use this to capture who they are referring or getting referrals for, so that you can kind of just turn around and drop that into the quarterly progress report totals. So all the great resources that we've shared thus far, the meeting recording for this will be posted in probably a couple of days from now, because it takes a little bit of time to deal with, render that, but that will also be here as well. So does anyone have any other questions?
Nothing in the chat. But just know that we realize also that, maybe at 2:00 this morning, your brain is going to be, ruminating about all the stuff that you learned, and not that we'll answer you at 2:00 in the morning, but you're more than welcome to send us your questions via email. And, if you're thinking about it, someone else is thinking about it, and we can put together, some clarification maybe in the guide if it makes sense to do that. Last call. You guys are all very welcome. So we look forward to any questions as you get closer to filling this out. And we'll be sending out additional information fairly shortly for project director calls, which aren't just for project directors anymore. They're for everybody. But we'll be sending that out shortly. Other than that, Ashley, any parting words?
No, thank you for attending. Good luck. We look forward to hearing about all the great stuff that you're all working on. And then we won't tell your bosses that you got out a half hour early. So
Yeah.
we'll be
We'll
cool.
just keep the recording on.
Oh, dang it. Okay. But anyways, thank you again. We really appreciate all the great questions because that helps us refine our products as well. So
Thank you. You guys, happy Friday Eve and enjoy your weekend.